Okay, so we're going to go over the plagues. Plagues are very interesting when you get to looking at them because they happened. So it happened in the past. It has a meaning for us today in the present. And guess what? A lot of these are going to be in the future at the end times. So we're going to go over what is the purpose and meaning. What purpose and meaning did the 10 plagues have? Now, I found out when I was looking at these that basically God had three categories that he wanted to really get to the people. Okay, he really wanted to emphasize this. And the first thing was he wanted to identify that they were in sinful living. The first three plagues. The next three plagues were plagues about their health, and the last three plagues about their environment. And of course, we know the 10th plague was the one that talked about their salvation. So I put this in different categories of what actually happened today, what is it for us today, and end times. And then we'll stop and we can talk about each one a little bit. So the first three were the blood, the frogs, and the gnats. So it starts in Exodus 7:17, and it's interesting that blood was in the first plague because it would also be a part of the last plague. The Egyptians considered the Nile River to be a god that gives life, and it was called Hopi. They would also sacrifice their babies and drink their blood, a common practice among Baal worshippers. So I wanted to stop here and talk about this because that's really relevant to our day and age. If you read a lot of stuff on Facebook and you see about some of the things that are going on even in our country and how they're bringing Baal symbols and the Arch of Baal they brought into America, and it goes around to the different cities, and a lot of occult practices, and they're saying that some of these satanic cults are even doing sacrifices. And then, of course, I can't remember adrenochrome or whatever, if you know about that. That's the drinking of blood. People drink blood in order to supposedly make themselves younger. So has anybody else heard and read things about this? No?
Vaguely, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, the reason I bring that up is because we're starting to see the same sinfulness that was in Egypt, Baal worship, which is basically the worship of Baal actually means God. And so it's the worship of any other God besides Jehovah. So was turning the waters to blood a way to ridicule their God of life, mocking them that drinking blood cannot sustain life, but will bring death. Water is essential to survive and to keep the generations pure, but their God destroyed families and led them into sinful practices. Oh, sorry. Today, our hope of salvation and freedom from the slavery of sin is in the living water that comes from Yeshua and from his blood shed for us. Yeshua tells us that he is the living water, his blood saves us. Now, in the end times, we see in Revelation, so a lot of the same sort of thing is going to be in Revelation. In Revelation 8:8, a third of the sea becomes blood. And in Revelation 16:3-6, it says, and you have given them blood to drink. So what we're going to see here is what it meant to the generation and that when it actually happened, what it means for us today and in the end times. The next one was frogs, Exodus 8:2. The scripture actually says that it was a single frog that came from the water, and out of that one frog came many frogs that covered the land. The frog god's name was Hecht, and it was supposed to aid women in the pain of childbirth. But this plague showed that a frog could not multiply life and ease their pain, because the result of Eve's sin was pain in childbirth. So that it couldn't do away with what do I want to say, with consequences of sin. So the consequences of sin was that women would have to have pain in childbirth. Today we know that Satan comes forth from our river of life to tempt us with the pleasure of sin, but just one sin can reap many if we do not trust in Yeshua to cleanse us before sin multiplies and gives us a life of pain. So I try to tell my kids, and I'm sure you do too, that once you start a lie, then you have to lie about another lie, and then you have to lie about that lie, and then so sin multiplies. In the end times, Revelation 16:13 says, unclean spirits like frogs came out of the mouth of the dragon. The dragon is just one dragon, but out of his mouth came spirits. So these are spirits, sinful spirits, demonic spirits, like frogs, like the frogs that came out in Egypt. Any questions on that one? Any comments? The next one was life.
What is the river of life
Pardon?
of today? And
Say that again, I'm sorry.
he said on the notes it says, from our river of life to tempt us.
Right. In our lives, we have sin that comes forth from other sins. And actually, what I kind of meant by that was like, right now I'm suffering the consequences of my daughter's sin. So out of the sinfulness of this life, we all suffer, right? We suffer from other people's sins. We suffer from our sins. I don't know, it's just my way of trying to relate it to the frog coming out of a river. Is that okay?
Okay, yeah, I was just saying because he says we know that Satan comes forth from our river of life. I was just curious what our river of life was, because I suppose back then it was agricultural, right? And now is it like money, or is it?
Well, that back then it was actually out of the river. It was actually it came out of the river. They had the Nile River. Remember, Moses was put in the Nile River, and so out of that river came a big frog, and out of that frog, it opened its mouth, and all these it just covered the land with frogs.
Okay.
So in our life, if we consider our life like a river, it flows, and people are going to sin around us, and we're affected by it. Or we do one sin, and out of that sin comes many sins because we either have to cover it up or we do something else, or so that's what I was trying to imply with today. Some of these are hard, of course, to make it relevant for today, but that's what I was trying to do. The next one is gnats. It's Exodus 8:17. Next came the gnats and the flies. Sometimes you'll see it as flies, and sometimes as gnats, sometimes as lice. Anyway, they were irritating, let's just put it that way, to add to the pollution of the land. Always a sign of death or disease. They are a constant irritation, especially around wounded areas. So if you have a wound, or if something has died or something, you'll always see flies, or you'll see gnats around them. And if you have a wound and you see flies, it's very irritating. Today, when we don't follow the ways of the Lord, the flies and gnats of worldliness and sin will cover our lives and bring forth problems that gnaw at us constantly every day. So what I'm trying to say here is that these flies that are always a sign of death and disease, they're going to gnaw at us. They're going to try to irritate us and make us be a sinful person, draw us into that sinfulness by picking at us and picking at us. One of the things that I was thinking about when I was doing this was just like commercials on TV. Okay. You may never want to buy, I don't know, an upside down ice cream cone or whatever, but if if they keep advertising it and advertising it, and then all of a sudden maybe I'd want to go get one of those. That's the way sin is. It just picks at us and picks at us and flies around like a fly, and it just irritates you. Like flies. Flies irritate you, but so does sin. Sin just picks at you and tries to get you to be sinful. Any other questions on this? I know it's kind of hard to write it down the way I kind of see it. Anything else about sinful living? All right.
Going back to the frogs. You say that the frogs came from one frog.
Yes.
Is that from the Hebrew translation? Hebrew?
It's
because
in the scriptures in Exodus 8 too.
Yes, but here it looks like the reference that I see. Let's see, verse 8 and it's all plural. So I was wondering whether the translation was not quite accurate.
I don't know. I did a lot of research on it. I'm pretty sure it was one frog. And then out of that was many frogs, of course.
Yes.
And the same thing with Revelation 16:13. It's one frog, the dragon.
Yeah.
I was surprised too, because I read it over and over again. I thought, well, just a whole bunch of frogs came out, but one frog came out, and then out of the mouth of that frog came a whole bunch of other frogs.
Yeah, I'm looking right now at Exodus 8, and I failed to see where it's at, but maybe it's I need to check the other translations.
Yeah, or I don't know, maybe sometimes it's commentaries that I read. I read a lot. Maybe Jewish literature. I read Jewish literature. All right, next we're going to look at the 3 plagues of health. God was attacking their health. And of course, this is one thing that we know now after being through the COVID stuff, that the devil wants to attack us in our health and make us afraid and scared, because that's a way of manipulation. So the first one was the beetles, Exodus 8:21. The first plague of this series of plagues was actually the dung beetle. I don't know how to say it, whatever.
Carabacus.
There you go. This beetle would collect dung into balls, then roll its ball to a suitable location where it digs an underground chamber in which it hides the ball. It then either eats the ball itself or lays an egg in it, covers the chamber, and departs, repeating the procedure as many times as it can. The larva feeds on the ball of dung after the egg hatches. They accordingly held the species to be sacred. The name of this beetle god was Ha-Arab. They believed this god would protect them from all health problems and escort them into the heavens when they died. So when I did my book on Rahab and Ruth, in Rahab's day, I did look up in Egypt, they held this beetle as helping them usher and protect them. It's sort of like a St. Christopher medal. You know how they would, I don't know if people do it much anymore. They'd usually hang St. Christopher in their car to protect them from having an accident. Well, they would wear a picture of this dung beetle, or maybe the beetle itself. They would wear it as supposedly protection. So they felt like they would be protected from death, from bad things happening to them, from sickness and that sort of stuff. Once again, we see the humor of Jehovah our God when he sends a multiple of these beetles, and sometimes they'll call these flies, to cover the land. Surely he was saying to himself, so you think this God can protect you? Here, I will cover your land in them. See if they can protect you now. The other picture God may have been sending them is to stop relying on a God that gets its nourishment from death. For in order for this beetle to reproduce, it has to feed off the waste of other animals. So it's sort of like the devil. The devil, he gets his fun, his nourishment from death, seeing us suffer and that sort of stuff. Today, this points us to the need to trust in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that is the creator of life. Who are we putting our faith in when it comes to health issues? Any other way will lead to death. So it's about the beetle. Any question about the dung beetle? You can read about it. It was a real big thing in Egypt.
I thought it was interesting. I thought it was interesting when you said it fed off of death, like a lot of what's in the like movies and entertainment and all that. That's essentially, I don't know. That's how I kind of see it. It's all death or
Yes,
distraction.
yes,
There's no life in it or that form of entertainment.
yes. Yeah, really, that's right. All right, the next plague was death of their livestock. One of the main animals that the Egyptians produced was the Apis bull. Apis was the most important of all the sacred animals in Egypt. The cult of the Apis bull started at the beginning of Egyptian history, probably as a fertility god connected to grain and the herds. In a funerary context, as you can see, I got some of this stuff. I would not probably use the word funerary, but the Apis was a protector of the diseased and linked to the pharaoh. This animal was chosen because it symbolizes the king's courageous heart, great strength, fertility, and fighting spirit. The Apis bull was considered to be a manifestation of the pharaoh, as bulls were symbols of strength and fertility, qualities which are closely linked to kingship. So the Egyptians were not only seeing much of their vital nourishment being taken from them, but it was also showing them that they couldn't rely on the pharaoh to take care of them either. So today, what do we rely on to take care of us? Sometimes it's our husbands or our family, it's our jobs, government, children, parents, our church. But you know what? There's really only one we can really trust to provide, and that is Yeshua. Because things are going to happen, our jobs may, we may lose them, we might lose our husbands, or our children may not come through for us when we get old. So, although we know that we can rely on them to a point, in the end, the only one we can really rely on is Yeshua. Now, in the end times, Revelation 6:8, authority was given to them over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword and with famine, with pestilence, and by the wild beast of the earth. So that's where the wild beasts come in, the same as the livestock. Any questions on this plague? All right, the next one in health was the final attack to their health was boils. It was said that Moses threw soot into the air to start this plague. One commentator speculates it was from the same furnace they used to make bricks, which could have been a picture of the Israelites' toil and tears. For sure, it was a sign of mourning to put on sackcloth and ashes. So it foreshadowed a period of great agony and suffering. Their beetle could not protect them. Their bull could not sustain them. Now the boils would destroy the quality of their lives. Not just their own lives, but the lives of their children, their pets, and other animals which they loved. Today, we know that our God not only protects us and sustains us, but heals us and gives us a quality of life that is honoring to him. In the end times, we see in Revelation 16, it became a loathsome sore and malignant sore on the people who had the mark of the beast and who worshiped his image. So in Revelation, there is a sore that comes to those that take the mark, but those that don't take the mark, they don't get that sore. Any questions on this one? Any comments? I like your comments.
What is the mark?
I don't know what the mark is gonna be. It's a lot of people think it's a little chip that's gonna be in your hand or your forehead. I'm not really sure what the mark is. It doesn't really, it just talks about the mark of the beast. It doesn't, and it says that the mark will be in your hand or your forehead, and that the number is going to be 666. Other than that, we're just gonna have to, some people think it is a chip because and you know how when you look at the scanner thing on the barcodes and stuff, they think, well, it's going to be 6 numbers, 6 numbers, and 6 numbers. I don't know. I have no idea. God doesn't spell that part out. So, anybody else have any idea?
Hey, Sue, I would like to comment. I remember seeing an article about this, and the article was referring about an ideology and things that the people that have ideology did. So not necessarily a mark, but something that is engraved in their minds and actions.
Well, that could be true too, because when you read the New Testament, it does say, when you become a believer, you get the mark of the Holy Spirit. So that could also be a spirit that you've taken on. Like I said, I don't really know. I've done a little bit of studying on it, but a lot of things God just wants us to trust him, I think. All right, so that's there. The last 3 are plagues of the environment. So the first is hailstones. Exodus 9:18, we read in Job 38, have you entered into the treasury of the snow or seen the storehouse of the hail, which I have reserved for times of trouble? Hailstones would completely destroy most crops if they were ripe or even near ripe, and this was just days before the barley harvest. Although these next 2 plagues did not have a specific god in which the people worshiped, they were now seeing that the god of the Nile, the frog god, the beetle god, the bull god, and their own Pharaoh could not protect them from the effects of the weather. Today, what are they trying to frighten us with? Global weather problems. They claim that we are the ones that control the weather and will give no acknowledgement that God is in control. So our global warming or global, climate change is all because of us. We're the ones that are causing it, and they don't give God any credit or, acknowledge that God does anything. In the end times, Revelation 16:21 says, enormous hailstones, about 100 pounds each, wow, came down from heaven upon men, and men blasphemed God because of the plague of the hail. So I've been in hailstones. The one, if you can see the one in the background there, that was one that came down on my neighbor's house. They had a 2-story house. It came through the roof. It came through the 2nd floor, and it landed in their living room. They had a hole all the way through their house. It was huge. Look how big it is. It was huge.
That was in
what?
Or was that in Plano?
Actually, they lived in Wiley. But all the windows in my house I had to replace because the hail hit my windows, and they were older windows. So well, not all of them. The back of the house I didn't have to replace, but all the ones in the front of the house I had to replace because of the hail. It was horrible. All the cars were all dented if they were sitting out, and it was bad. I can't remember when it was, about probably 2017, somewhere in there. The next, locusts. When the locusts came, they stripped all vegetation, fruit trees, shade trees, anything that would feed shade, or sustain life. The land was utterly devastated for months or even years. Any hope that they could recover from the plagues before then was gone now. There was now a continuous reminder of all that had happened in the land. Mother Earth, quote, had died, and they realized that nothing could control her. In other words, Only God was the one that was in control. I kind of see this. We had a windstorm here a few months ago, I guess, maybe last month. But even today, I can see the effects of what happened. It's like every day I go by my land and other people's land, and I see the changes that are happening because of this windstorm. And I think by this time, what was this plague number 8? 8. Now you could see all the things that had happened to the land. Today we see locusts and famine around the world, but instead of crying out to God, we curse the land. So we've seen lots of famines and locusts. We don't hear too much about them right now because there's so much other stuff going on. But a few years back, there was like these big locust things that were going through different parts of the Middle East. Of course, famines in Africa. And so, but people don't, instead of crying out to God, they curse the land. In the end times, Revelation 9:3 says, then out of the smoke came locusts upon the face of the earth. So we're going to see locusts. Well, we may not see it, but there's going to be locusts in the end times. The last plague of the environment was that of darkness. The last plague of darkness was the most powerful attack of all because it challenged the sun god. And of course, the sun god is the big god. And in Egypt, they called him Ra. Ever predictable, ever present, and a marker of the passing of time, the sun was always with them. Who could challenge the sun? Who could control it? Only the one true God that was the creator of not only the sun, but the heavens and the earth and all that dwell upon it. God showed his ultimate power by bringing darkness so dense that it was absolutely the absence of all life. And he was able to isolate it in only the area of the Egyptians. Now that's power. Today, we hear a lot of talk about controlling our environment, but God is the ultimate controller. What is man that he is mindful of us? When we felt tied to the earth around us for our food, our clothes, our shelter, it seemed that our gratitude and dependence on the Creator was ever so much deeper and closer in our daily lives. When calamities strike, we cry out to God, but we need to continually be aware that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is wanting us to stay close to him and trust him at all times. And in the end times, Revelation 16:10 says, and the fifth angel poured out his vial upon the seat of the beast, and his kingdom was full of darkness, and they gnawed their tongues for pain. And any questions on the darkness and the sun god? All right. Huh?
I heard with this global warming issue around that one tactic is contemplating is to raise a ship that would block the sun.
I'm afraid you were breaking up and I didn't really understand that. Can you say it again, maybe?
I couldn't hear it either. I couldn't hear her.
Okay, I'm sorry. Is my volume up high enough?
Go
Can you
ahead.
hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. It's just breaking up.
Okay. I heard the other day that there was the government, our government is trying to devise a system in lieu of this global warming to design a shield that would shield out the sun.
Yes. Yes, I read that too. Bill Gates. Bill Gates wants to cover the whole world. I'm like, he's so stupid because that would bake us. Because it would bake us. We couldn't live. It'd be so hot. He's just an idiot.
Yeah.
Yes, I read that too.
Crazy.
Well, I'm sure Jesus or Yeshua is going to come again before that. So the last one, number 10, The number 10 has a meaning. It's completion. So number 10, this is complete. It's a completion of all God had in store for the Egyptians. Was, of course, the killing of the firstborn, but it was also a picture of God's redemption's plan. Although listed as one of the plagues, this was not just the straw that broke the Pharaoh's back. It was a picture of the plan of redemption that was written on the heart of God before the world began. Exodus 11:5 says, all the leaven had been used in preparation for the journey. They had been given all the valuables from the people of Egypt. They had chosen a lamb and kept it as a pet for 4 days, and now they waited. I can only imagine the thoughts on the first evening before the day they slaughtered the lambs. They had been told of their escape and their journey to the promised land, but this had never happened before, and what would be ahead of them. The children had grown attached to the lamb and were loving on it one last time. The adults undoubtedly were talking about seeing freedom from their harshness, and the air was filled with anticipation. For sure, they felt hope of a new way of life. This was the beginning of the 14th day of Aviv. In the morning, they arose and went to slaughter the lamb that they had cuddled in their arms the night before. They would have to trust the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to do what Moses had told them to do. It was the day of preparation before the redemption from the harshness of slavery. Now, they didn't have what we consider the Passover meal. Like, they didn't call it unleavened bread, and they didn't, they, like, most of the Passover meal that we do is just tradition. People have, this is what they've done in order to talk about what has actually happened. But at this time, all they knew to do was they had to use up the leaven. They had to bake bread that was unleavened so they could take it on the trip, because otherwise it would go moldy, right? So, stuff like that, little stuff. And then they slaughtered the lambs and put the blood over the doorpost. Now, when you put the blood over the doorpost, it does not really make a T. Like everyone says, well, yeah, they made a cross. Actually, if you know Hebrew, it makes a het. A het looks like a doorpost. Okay, and so the het represents life. And that's why you use het for l'chaim, and chaim is life. So basically, you can think of the fact that the blood on the doorpost symbolized the eventual blood of Yeshua, the blood of the Lamb, the blood of Yeshua, being over the doorposts of our lives. And when we walk through it, we get eternal life, and we get to go to the promised land. So I kind of like the het symbol, even better than the cross, because it represents the word life. Anybody else have any comment on the last plague?
Is Aviv the same thing as Nisan for the first month? Because earlier you said the 14th day of Aviv.
Oh, the word Aviv just means spring.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But
sorry.
Nisan.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, I probably should change that, people. That the word Aviv just means spring. At about 3 o'clock, they took the blood of the lamb and with a hyssop branch covered the doorposts of their homes. They roasted the lamb and sat down to partake of it. Such a feeling of joy and peace must have filled the families. Tomorrow they would travel to a land filled with milk and honey, a land where they could be free to raise their families in prosperity. And yet there was a sense of foreboding in those who knew that tonight's death would pass by, but only for those who had the blood of the lamb on their doorpost. Now, I did a study on hyssop. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about what I found with the hyssop. And when you look throughout the Bible and you see hyssop represents cleansing. Okay, so a lot of times the Egyptians and everybody felt like if you partook of hyssop before you died, it cleansed your soul. So hyssop was a cleansing, and so they would give people hyssop right as they were dying, because it supposedly cleansed their soul. Because at that time, Egyptians, they didn't have any, well, even the Israelites, they didn't have a way to cleanse your soul right at the time of death. Okay, like they just had to rely on Yom Kippur. But even before this all happened, they didn't even have Yom Kippur. They didn't have the feasts and everything. So they used hyssop. I just wanted to say that. And so I got to thinking about when Jesus died. Okay. So when Jesus died, the first thing they offered him was oh, what did they call it? I can't think of the name of it. But anyway, they offered him a mixture of, they said vinegar with, I think they called it myrrh. No, not myrrh. What did they call it? Anyway, the first time he was offered something, he rejected it. Okay. A lot of people said, well, he rejected it because it was a painkiller and he wanted to suffer the pain. And I'm like, that doesn't seem right, because the second time they offered him something, he accepted it. So when you look at the scriptures in the New Testament, the first time it had something added to it. I believe, this is just my belief, that the first time they offered him hyssop, like maybe vinegar with hyssop in it, to numb the pain and to cleanse his soul. Well, he didn't accept that because he was taking on the sins of all the people, and he didn't want even any sort of insinuation that he had to take the hyssop to cleanse his soul. And but the second time he took it, it didn't have it in it. I can't remember what they called it. Anyway, I'm brain dead, but the second time he did take it, and I think he took it the second time because it was just vinegar, and vinegar eased the pain because he was fully man. He was in pain, and he did take the vinegar in order to ease his pain. But the first time he didn't take it at all. I think it was because it was mixed with hyssop, and he didn't want any sort of anybody thinking he was taking it to cleanse his soul. That's just my take on it when I studied the word hyssop. Anyway, you might think about it once you see the word in the scripture. Yeshua's day, it was the night of preparation. The disciples were meeting together to remember the exodus of Moses and get ready for a busy day of preparing their sacrifice. Just as in the days of Moses, Messiah's family, although unaware, were loving on the lamb that would be slain. Surely there was a great hope and expectation that soon the Messiah would free them from their earthly oppression and usher in the Messianic kingdom. Just days before Yeshua was greeted by throngs of worshipers as he rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. What were the next plans? When would his kingdom come? So remember, he came in on the day of preparation. We talk about this. He came in on what's it called? I don't know why my brain is dead. Anyway, Palm Sunday. When he came in on Palm Sunday, everyone was all excited. Now, why were they excited? They were excited because they thought he was going to usher in the Messianic kingdom, right? They were all excited. Oh boy, here comes our king. He's going to free us. He's going to free us from the Jewish people. Well, that's what they were all hoping for. And even the disciples the night before were thinking the same thing, that he was going to be an earthly king. After the meal, the unleavened bread, the perfect Lamb of God, his only son, willingly submitted to lay down his life as a sacrifice for all, that would take his blood and put it on the doorposts of their hearts. By 9 o'clock, he was nailed to a cross, and at 3, just as the last lamb, the lamb for the nation of Israel, was being slain, Yeshua gave up his life for our atonement. They took his body quickly and laid it in the tomb, because when the sun set, it was the beginning of a holy Sabbath day of rest, the day of unleavened bread. The night that the Hebrews ate the lamb and stayed in their homes as the death angel passed by, and all their firstborn were saved. Yet God spared not his son, his firstborn, but offered him as a ransom for all who had believed. Now remember that when Jesus was taken, they offered to release Jesus or Barabbas. Remember that? And so why do you think the people were wanting Jesus crucified? They just a week earlier had said, you know, Hosanna, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Why do you think all of a sudden they changed their mind?
Listen.
Well, they thought he was going to be king and he wasn't doing it. So they thought, well, this has to be a false Messiah, because our Messiah is going to come and he's going to be king. So when they came in the first time, they thought he was going to be the king and they were all excited. Oh, here he comes. Blessed is he. He's coming in the name of the Lord. Okay. But then when he got arrested and beaten, and he didn't all this, you know, he didn't have an army behind him. He wasn't, you know, fighting to be king. Then they were mad. They were upset. They thought, well, now this is a false Messiah. He's not doing what we thought he was going to do. So they said, crucify him, because they felt like he had betrayed them. They didn't understand. They didn't understand. So after they put the blood on the doorpost, the next morning, the Hebrew people started their journey. So day 15, they went from Ramsey to Sukkot. 16, you can look at this up in the Bible. By the 18th, 3 days and 3 nights after the Passover, they came to the Red Sea. And they thought they were dead for sure. They thought, well, now, you know, we're trapped. They're going to kill us. Here they come. And, but God saved them. The people crossed the Red Sea from impending death of the army of Egypt into the promise of new life and ultimately a new land. Yeshua was put to death, was put in the tomb before the evening of the 15th day, and early in the morning, 3 days and 3 nights before the sun rose, or the beginning of the 18th day, they found his grave empty. As Yeshua came forth from the grave, we know he defeated death and rose to give us life. I just find it just so amazing when I realize that everything that happened in Egypt happened in Jesus, with Jesus. 3 days, 3 nights, they got to the Red Sea. They thought they were going to die, but God saved them and brought them out from death and to new life, basically on their way to the promised land. And same thing with Yeshua. Now, whoever should choose to believe in his atoning grace and be willing to follow him will cross over from death into life, a beautiful picture of what happens in baptism. We cross over from impending death, from a life of sin that we once were a part of, into a new life with the promise of heaven to come. Just because we have been saved, however, doesn't mean that we won't go through the wilderness until we get rid of our old thoughts and patterns of behavior. So the Hebrews escaped the Egyptians, and they got to the other side, headed towards the promised land, but they had to go through the wilderness first, because they had to get out all of the worldly ways of the Egyptians. And so for us, it's sort of the same thing. We become believers, and we know that we're dead to sin, and we have a gift of eternal life, but we're here because we have to get things out of our lives that God doesn't want in our lives anymore. I think they call it work out your salvation with fear and trembling. It's not like you're working for your salvation. It's just you're being cleansed. If you've been a Christian for very long, you know that some of those things that you still struggled with when you were first a Christian, you don't struggle with them anymore. You struggle with something different maybe, but things get easier as you go along, and things change as you go along. You have different problems as you go along, and God makes you stronger, and he cleans out a lot of the stuff in your life he doesn't want you to have in there. And that's what happened when they went through the wilderness. So anyway, that's all that we're going to do tonight. Next time we'll look at Feast of First Fruits. Does anybody have any questions about the plagues and how they left Egypt?
I'm just curious